Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends, participants, and viewers. Welcome to this seventh session of Islam for Youth. We have been discussing a lot of issues regarding some of the very sensitive topics that have taken our attention in the past couple of years, maybe. And those of you who might be delving deep into the questions that might arise when you study the Quran, or of course when you interact with your friends and your teachers and your colleagues, you'll find that these questions are invariably discussed, or at times they're just hushed under the carpet. So the purpose of this series, as I've been trying to elaborate all along, is that we are able to discuss everything that comes to our mind, and there's no such thing as a taboo question. There's no such thing as a prohibited prohibited fruit, so to speak. Everything can be tasted as far as this session is concerned. Please don't hold back any questions that you might have, and any others that you might find interesting or you would like them to be discussed. You can always suggest them as well. So today we are going to discuss or try to discuss four topics, and hopefully if we are able to complete these topics, then by the end of this session you should have a fair idea regarding what Islam says regarding these four topics, or at least what I have understood from Islam. So the first of them is a very something which is often discussed, and that is, are women inferior in intellect to men? And this has arisen because of a narrative of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also as a general feeling which pervades many minds that perhaps women are inferior in their intellect, but because of the fact that we find a narrative of the Prophet also to this effect, and so it becomes all the more important that we try to understand that narrative. And then we have this issue of pornography. What are the rules and directives of Islam regarding pornography? And this is something which is so rampant all over. It's just a click away that we need to be mindful and also cautious in many things regarding this issue. And then we have the issue of Dhabiha Halal, which of course is something again very often discussed, that when we go out to restaurants and eat and we have non-halal food, or in the interpretation of some scholars that is still halal if they're served by the people of the book, then what exactly should be our approach towards it. Finally, we have the issue of the rule of law, again, which is equally very important. What exactly is the status of the rule of law? Of course, this refers to the law of the land. And what if the law of the land at times seems to clash with the law of the Sharia? And similarly, what exactly should be our behavior towards the law of the land in many cases in which we seem to at times break the rules, but we think that, well, it's okay because at least we're not disobeying God in any way. So let us start off with the first of these issues, and that is, are women inferior to men in intellect? As I said, that this basically is an issue which has arisen, although it has arisen because of various, there are many notions which have actually given rise to this notion, this concept. But specifically, you can see this narrative being displayed before you on your screens, which has led Muslim minds to believe that yes, women are inferior to men in intellect, and this is because of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's tradition or narrative, which you can see right before you. I'm just going to read the English translation of this narrative. It says that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he's a very famous companion of the Prophet. So he reports from the Prophet that once the Prophet set off for the prayer place on the occasion of Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Azha. So he doesn't remember whether it was the Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Azha, but he does remember that he went off to say his prayer and deliver the sermon. So he passed by a group of women and said, so he started his conversation with a group of women who were on his way. And there were some other sentences also which he said to them, but which I have just suppressed because they are not relevant to our discussion today. And the part that we will discuss is now is now said as, I have seen no more than you rob even a resolute man of his senses in spite of being naqisat aql wa deen. So you see this expression naqisat aql wa deen, this has given rise to this notion that women are naqisul aql and naqis deen. So in generally the word naqis is translated as deficient or having something in deficiency. And aql, of course, is something which we all know in the Arabic language and also in the Urdu language, which refers to our intellect. And then we have this expression also which says wadeen. So it's not just that the expression says naqisati aql wadeen. Aql, it says naqisati aql wadeen, which means that women are deficient in their intellect and in their deen, if an exact translation is done. Of course, this would be very anomalous and very weird, that how can we regard the deen or the religion of women to be naqis or deficient in any way. Anyway, we'll come back to this expression once again. So when the Prophet said this was their response. O Allah's Messenger, what is this naqs in our religious and worldly affairs? So he replied, the Prophet, of course, was quick to reply, and the women were also quick to ask that, well, if you say that we have naqs or deficiency in our religious and worldly affairs, so what is that? He said, is not the evidence of a woman equal to half of a man's? They said, yes. He said, this is the naqs in their worldly affairs. So, shahadatul mar'ati misla nisfi shahadatul rajul, qulna bala, qala fazalika min nuqsani aqliha. So he says, well, this is the deficiency or shortcoming in their worldly affairs, that they are the testimony of a woman is half that of a man. And then they said that is it not a fact that when they enter the period of menses, they neither pray nor fast? They said yes. Whereupon he said, this is the naqs in their religious affairs. So the naqs or the defect in their religious affairs is that when they are passing through their menstrual cycles, they are not obligated. In fact, the obligation of the prayer and the fast is lifted from them, and hence this is the naqs of their religious affairs. So you see, this is a very strong notion which has arisen amongst Muslims, that the Prophet himself has pointed out that women are deficient in intellect. Okay, as I said, we need to revisit the translation of this particular narrative, and the reason that we need to revisit it, because had the words just been women are naqisati aql, which would mean that they are deficient in intellect, there could have been a case made and we would have argued on some other grounds. But as I said, the narrative just does not say naqisati aql. It says naqisati aql wa deen. So if the word naqs is translated as deficiency, then there is no other option but to have the complete translation of this expression as women are deficient in their intellect, which is aql and wadeen, and they have some deficiency in their religion as well. And when we actually see the answers of the Prophet, we find out that the word naqs or deficiency is again something, it seems to be wrongly translated, because the examples which the Prophet gave are not examples of deficiency in any way. They are examples of rebate being given or concession being given. For example, when he said that women are not allowed to, or they're not required to fast and pray when they are passing through their menstrual cycles, what does this mean? I mean, the Prophet has said that the obligation of the prayer and the fast has been lifted. So this is not any deficiency in their religion. It is in fact a concession. And it is from here that we can also gauge the fact that at times what happens is that when we translate certain words from one language to another language, we at times carry over or we make this mistake of translating the word which has a very specific meaning in a certain language as to have the same meaning in another language. So in the Arabic language, the word naqasa, as is the case, is very seldom used for the meaning of defect or deficiency. It is mostly, I mean, in naqasa, the word naqasa in Arabic would mean to give less, to make something less, to give a rebate, to give a concession. And this rebate or this concession is probably the exact meaning that we can understand through this expression. So if we translate the whole expression naqisati aql wa deen as that women are given concession in matters of their aql and in matters of their deen, then the translation would be perfect. And it is because of the fact that the word naqs is somehow stuck in our mind to mean deficiency. And this is particularly true in the Urdu language, where the word naqs is, of course, it does mean something which is defective. But this is not the case in the Arabic language. In the Arabic language, if the word has to be translated in the word of defect, then there has to be some concomitant indication. Otherwise, the word naqs in Arabic just means to give less, to do something in a lesser way. And in other words, to be more concession, to give more concession to someone. So, in fact, this narrative would not at all mean that the Prophet is telling women that they have deficient intellect or they have deficient religion. What he's telling them is that in their aql and in their religion, aql, of course, here signifies worldly affairs, and this is a very common expression in the hadith literature of the Prophet. And when aql or deen are used in this way, they refer to the temporal affairs and to the spiritual affairs. So the temporal affairs are the worldly affairs, which are the affairs of aql, and the religious affairs, of course, are the affairs of deen, which are spiritual affairs. So what he's trying to tell us is that in spite of being weak, or the weaker gender, they are so strong at times that they rob a resolute person. You see, you just need to first look again at the context. Once again, let me just display the narrative before you, how the narrative has actually started off. He says that I have seen no one more than you rob even a resolute man of his senses, in spite of having this concession. So even a person, even very strong-willed men, they are at times argued into something very different if they start arguing with the women. And this is what the Prophet has said, that in spite of having this concession, such is your intellect and such is your power of argumentation, that you rob a resolute man of his senses. So you see, this also collocates with that. And this should not be any cause of surprise, because in languages, this happens, that when words switch from one language to another, they undergo a great change in meaning. And this is not just with, for example, Arabic or Urdu, or it happens all the time. So a few examples that I can give to you are, for example, in the French language, the word bride does not mean the bride that we normally associate in the English language with. It actually means bridle or the reins of a horse or something like that. So the word bride is the same, B-R-I-D-E. So it's the same word in French and it's the same word in the English language. The syllables are exactly the same, the alphabet is exactly the same, but they have a world of difference. Similarly, the word chef, in the German language, chef refers to a boss, refers to your boss. But of course, in the English language, a chef is someone who cooks for you. So the word is exactly the same. And to give you an example from the Arabic language, look at the word ghaliz. The ghaliz, which is something which is found in the Arabic language, does not refer to the common Urdu meaning of filth. It actually refers to something which is very strong and sturdy. So the marriage contract between husband and wives has been called as misaq and ghaliza, which means a very strong bond. So a misaq is a covenant or a bond, and ghaliz is something which is strong. So you cannot just translate the word ghaliz as you do it in the Urdu language to mean filthy. It's not a filthy contract, so to speak. So this is in linguistics, this is called the phenomena of false cognates. False cognates, what does that mean? Well, it means exactly what I've just explained, that the word is the same in two different languages, but it does not always have the same meaning in two different languages. So on a very similar note, the word naqs, at times has been translated as deficient, but this is not its common meaning in Arabic. It is in the Arabic language, it is used to give some concession. And this is, as I said, absolutely evident from not only the context of the narrative, but also from the questions which have been asked. For example, if women are not allowed or have been given this concession that they don't need to come to the court alone, and they can have a chaperone with them or another woman with them who can remind them. So this is basically a rebate given to them, concession given to them, because in the times of Prophet Muhammad, as I've discussed earlier on, women, when they were in those times, they were not used to this atmosphere of giving testimony in before a judge or someone who's an arbitrator. So to give due deference to their own situation, they were given this concession that, well, if you want, you can always bring along someone with you. And similarly, in cases of religion, we know that women are given this concession that they don't need to fast or need to pray when they are going through their menstrual cycles. Again, this is a concession which is given to them. So all in all, what we can make out of this narrative is that it is absolutely erroneous to believe in any way that women are deficient in intellect. In fact, what I can say, and I think many of you would corroborate, is that historically as well as intellectually, we find so many examples in which women are much superior in their intellect in so many areas. Just to start off with the wife of the Prophet, the beloved wife of the Prophet, Aisha radiallahu anha, I think she would easily be regarded as one of the greatest scholars of this ummah. And we find not a semblance of any lack of intellect in her. In fact, we find her correcting the Sahaba on many occasions, and even I can give you examples. And she would argue with the Prophet. I mean, she would argue in a positive way, to ask questions when the Prophet would say something. She would, when she would not understand something, she would actually counter question the Prophet and would like to know more about it. So, if anyone, you can clearly see the wife of the Prophet, the beloved wife of the Prophet, taking so much pains, and the Prophet very affectionately answering her on so many occasions. And on so many occasions, she actually corrected a lot of the companions in their understanding. And ever since her, I mean, there were other wives of the Prophet who relayed very many narratives like Salama and Hafsa. And similarly, we have a lot of women amongst the Tabi'un, and all the way to today's times, women have proven themselves to be superior in a lot of fields. So this is an observation on the empirical side, which of course is absolutely contrary to the common understanding of the narrative. So, narrative, which is commonly understood to mean that women are deficient in intellect, unfortunately has been grossly misinterpreted and misunderstood. It has an entirely different meaning, which I have just endeavored to explain. So, before I go on to the next topic, if you have any questions, this is the time.
Many thanks, Dr. Shehzad Saleem, for a wonderful session again today. So far, we don't have any raised hands on this topic. Let's see if somebody can show up. Asir, please go ahead and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, in classical Arabic language, the word naqs or nakasa, as you said, sir, was it always used as a concession or a rebate, or was it also used as for deficiency?
Well,
classical Arabic.
Yes, I understand. So in classical Arabic, it is mostly used for giving concession or to reduce something. So the word nakasa is actually originally means to reduce, to decrease something. So when we talk of giving concession, we are actually decreasing the responsibility of someone. So there are so many usages in the Arabic language in which the word nakasa actually refers to this reduction. And if it is to mean defect, then there has to be some other word present with that in order to make that sense. So it's not that the word nakasa in Arabic does not mean defect. Yes, at times it does, but then there is a concomitant indication, and also this is a very, I would say, a sparing use of the word. I mean, it's not a common use of the word. The common use of the word in the Arabic or classical Arabic is to give concession and rebate. So look at the narrative of that famous Bedouin who once came to the Prophet, and he said that, just tell me something that I can obey and enter into paradise. And the Prophet told him, well, you do this and you pray and you fast and etc. And at the end of that narrative, we find that Bedouin saying, La azid wala anqus. Okay, I'll do exactly what you say. Neither shall I add anything. La azid wala anqus. Or nor will I reduce anything. So this unqus is the same as naqasa. It's just a change in inflection. So exactly the same word has been used in this narrative to tell us that, well, I will not add anything to it, to what you have said to this list. If I have to go to paradise, and neither will I reduce anything, neither will I subtract anything from it. So this is a very common usage in the Arabic language, and as I said, for it to mean defect or deficiency, there has to be some other concomitant indication. But yes, it is used in Arabic in this meaning as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Hasib. Hasib, please go ahead.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I was late to the session, but is the word intelligence also mistranslated?
The word intelligence, no, because it's, the usage is actually the opposite. The word intelligence is not used. The word aql is actually used. So the words are naqisatul aql. So aql is just intellect, and naqasa or nakasa has been translated as deficiency or a shortcoming in intellect. So the word intelligence in its, the way you're spelling it out, it's not used in the narrative at all. So the word used actually is intellect.
Oh, okay. And so what do they mean by intellect as opposed to intelligence?
I mean, it's the same thing. Intellect means the power of understanding something, and that could vary from a person to person. When the intellect is something, I mean, a person could be very intelligent, a person could be less intelligent, but that would depend on how much aql he has. So aql is a basic faculty, and there is always a variation in the level of one's intellect. So this is just a general word. Whether a person has a very superior intellect or a lesser intellect, that's something beyond this word. This is just a generic word which tells us that a person is a person of understanding. Whether that understanding is a poor understanding or a good understanding or an excellent understanding, that is something besides the point. It's not being discussed here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad and Hasib. So we can go ahead to the next topic.
Okay, so we now move on to the second topic, which is the issue of pornography, and this is something that I think has to be talked about in a very open way, because this is an issue that all of us face in our lives, and I think the amount of questions that I do get, in fact, the amount of questions that I've been getting the last 25 or 30 years of my active life in religious studies, I think this is perhaps the most common question, and other questions which arise out of this question. So let me start off by saying that pornography, as far as pornography per se is concerned, it is not something which is regarded to be haram the way you would say haram as eating swine, or maybe eating something which is on which the name of God has not been taken. So the technical term of haram or forbidden, for example, cannot be applied to pornography in any way. However, what we need to understand is that it's not just always things which are prohibited that have to be abstained from. Things which lead to God's prohibitions have been equally proscribed, or at least highly discouraged in the Sharia and religion of God. So what we can say is that what actually is prohibited, or absolutely prohibited, in the religion of God is adultery or fornication. And anything which might lead a person to adultery or fornication is proscribed, is highly discouraged. And why is that so? So I would like to spend some time to explain that why is it that adultery has been so highly discouraged, and why is it that pornography, because of the fact that it might ultimately lead a person to that stage, comes as a barrier towards it, and what exactly is something which can be talked about when we are in a lesser situation than this. So I'm going to discuss all these possible situations. So I think the extreme situation that can arise when a person indulges in pornography is, of course, that this can lead him or her to adultery and fornication, which is very prohibited. And the reason that adultery and fornication are prohibited is to protect one's family. So you see, the highest importance, or I can say one of the very, very specifically important areas which the Quran and the Almighty has underlined, is to protect the institution of the family. Anything which is contrary to the protection of this institution is proscribed, it is prohibited. And adultery, of course, is something which totally raises the foundations on which an institution like the family can thrive. That institution needs the attention of the spouses towards one another, because unless the spouses are congenial and in harmony with one another, the child and the children who are going to be born to this family, they are going to suffer. So for the Almighty, the greatest protection that is needed is for that newborn child which is to come into this world. And for that, the institution of family is an essential institution, because the child needs the love of the father and the affection of the mother at the same time, and also because of the fact that they have extended families, it needs that family care as well. So the primary reason why adultery and fornication has been prohibited is to ensure that the institution of the marriage is protected and the attention of the spouses is reserved for one another. If this is not the case, then we can clearly see that men and women will not marry. They will have temporary relationships, and the children, if at all they are born, they would suffer from proper family care. And therefore, this is something which the Almighty wants Muslims to always, in fact, all believers to follow. It's not just Muslims. If you trace all the divine religions, you'll find that the institution of family has been there ever since Adam and Eve had been created, and it was for the protection of this institution that many of the social directives were given. Now, the other question that needs to be understood is that before even entering into a family institution, of course, there are boys and girls or men and women who are unmarried, and so they can ask this question: that what if we indulge in this situation, and it's not going to hamper or damp the institution of the family, because that is yet to start. So the answer to them would be that, remember that pornography or the desire for sex can be compared to, I would say, a whirlpool. Just imagine a whirlpool. If you enter into that whirlpool, you will go round and round and round, and it's so difficult to come out of that. It's such a catchy thing. So what happens is that if you start indulging in pornography or things which relate to it, whether you are inside the marriage bond, whether you're outside the marriage bond, you are caught up in that whirlpool to such an extent that you start having that addiction, so to speak. So in premarital relations or in the premarital situation, that addiction is something which can cause a number of issues. For example, once you are addicted to this, even when you enter a family, your addiction still remains, and hence your attention with the spouse or with your spouse is diverted to such an extent that you find your desire to be satisfied outside the marriage bond by viewing pornography, either going to the extent of doing fornication or adultery, or of course through self-pleasure, you just view pornography and release yourself through self-pleasure. So what happens is that this actually weakens that family bond even before you enter it, because it becomes an addiction. If you do it when you're in your teens or when you're starting, you get to start your married life, that addiction gets the better of you. And just imagine that whirlpool which goes round and round and round and round, and it has that huge effect on you that it sucks you into itself, and you start to be more specific in your desires, and you are not very, very caring regarding the desires of your spouse whenever you would be entering that marriage bond, because of course viewing pornography and entering into this whole field makes you a person who is self-sufficient in satisfying your sexual desire. The other thing which can happen, and it does happen, is that you start to become negligent of your duties, your life towards your own family, or your own commitments to the Almighty. They start to suffer, because you see, the sexual desire is such a powerful thing that when you start entering that desire in a way that is not, it's not very congenial. What happens is that you tend to overlook a lot of other responsibilities. So your basic responsibilities, like for example, towards your studies, towards your parents, towards the higher ideals of life, they get severely dented. And you see, what happens is that we need to realize that we have sent in this world, all of us, we are given a certain, all of us are equipped with certain abilities. We are equipped with certain talents. So the purpose of the Almighty in creating us is to make us discover. I mean, we need to discover our inner talent and aptitude, and then start contributing to the world around us through the talent that we have. So any external stimulus which gets the better of us is bound to also get the better of this quest to have a mission in life, to have an objective in life. So the second or third thing which happens if you start doing these things is not only the family bond is hampered, not only it is an addiction that takes you away from a future family. What it does is that it severely destroys that creativity or the power of your own expression in a lot of cases, or it has the capacity to do that. I mean, people can argue that it does not always do so. Okay, yes, it does not always do so, but in most cases it has the potential of drawing a person away from the higher objectives of life. Oh, okay, now comes the question that if this is such a thing that we need to abstain from and indulge, try to not indulge in this, then what exactly is the solution? Because the power or the extent of attraction and the ease of availability of pornography, given this situation, how can we sort of come to grips with this situation? So if we understand the gravity of the institution of the family, also we understand the gravity that how it affects our daily life routines and draws us away from many higher ideals of life that we need to accomplish. I think the answer to this question is that a desire which is so strong as a sexual desire, and a desire which has become so easy to satisfy in these current times because of technology that is available, the solution to this complex situation is to come up with something which is equally attractive, if not more. You see, so instead of snubbing that desire, because you just cannot snub your desire for sex, because that is something which is naturally found in you, which is like the desire for thirst. It's an instinct. The instinct for thirst, the instinct for food is something which will always remain with us because it is a biological function. So similarly, the desire to have sex is a biological function, and it cannot, it cannot be suppressed, or it should not be suppressed. What should be done is to keep it in check, and to do something in which that desire is actually kept in check. And what is that? And that is that I think the one of the greatest things which the Almighty has equipped every single human being to have that, that counter desire to do something which is in parallel and could be more potent than the desire towards your own instincts, at least if not as powerful as that, then to some extent. So that is the desire or the power of creativity. So to do something that we have been born for, and that creativity is found in each and every one of us. It could be at a lower level, it could be at a medium level, and it could be at a pronounced level. But it is the power of creativity that really makes us converge and focus on what we can do. And to couple with that power of creativity, of course, is that power to understand the fact that we have a role to play in the scheme of God. And that role in the scheme of God is to have a strong connection with the Creator. And the stronger that connection we have with our Creator, the more we will have the time to express our power of creativity. So my answer to this question would be that yes, if pornography is so addictive and we should abstain from it as much as possible, then the measure that we need to adopt is to have, first of all, a very strong connection with God, because the love for God is something which easily outdoes the desire towards our sexual impulse in many ways, or at least it keeps it in check. Because you see, when you realize that there is someone who is taking care of you, when you realize that there's someone who is really he's an all embracing person. Every single thing that we have in this world, which goes without saying, is something that entails our gratitude, and the normal body that we have, or the blessings that we have. I mean, there is a whole bunch of things that we all need to note and count that make us individuals who are grateful individuals, who are engulfed with the love of God, who are in fact drenched with this love because they feel that there's someone who's caring for you. So if you have that strong God connection, So that strong God connection, what it does is it gives you the time to express that creativity that you have in yourself. So the love of God coupled with that sense of creativity in which you use your aptitude, in which you use your talent to contribute to the society that you're living in. So you could be a good painter, you could be a good artist, you could be a good engineer or a doctor or even a person who loves music, anything. So you see, the things that make you closer to God, they afford you the opportunity to concentrate more on your talents and your skills. So the closer you are to God, and of course, the natural question that now arises is that what exactly brings us closer to God? So I think the thing that really brings us close to God is the acknowledgement of the gifts and blessings that he has given us all the time. And just referred to a while ago, look at your eyes, look at your normal body, look at the surroundings around you, look at Mother Nature, look at the breath that you're drawing, look at the heart machine inside you, which does not need any charging. It goes on and on and on. The sleep that you easily have at night in most cases. So there's so much to think about regarding God's blessings. So if you are able to connect to God through those blessings, and then you have specific worship rituals that connect you in a formal way as well, and then of course reading God's scripture. And when you say the God's scripture, it means not only the scripture that we have today, but the previous scriptures as well. They connect you to God in a way that you know more about him and you feel like talking to him. And of course, as I said, when you are strongly attached to God, the desire towards your sexual orientation or your sexual desire is always kept in check. And at the same time, it gives you that focus or attention in which you can discover your own self, discover your own talent, and put that talent to use for the service of the society that you live in. So you see, it's not like snubbing that desire. It's not like, totally eliminating that desire. It's like keeping it in check. And I have been telling this all along. In fact, I think I discussed this issue when I was discussing the sex education topic a couple of sessions ago. I also said that, this desire that comes in a person in which he feels like releasing himself in any way, if that is a result of any natural impulse which a person might have in his body, then masturbation or personal pleasure, which is or self-release, which we all know of, is not prohibited at all in religion in any way. Of course, if it is coupled with pornography or other related things, no one is saying that should be indulgent. What I'm trying to make my point here is that to satisfy one's sexual desire, if one indulges in self-release or self-gratification, it is absolutely erroneous to believe that it has been forbidden in any way in religion. There is no hadith or any Quranic verse which says so. I have discussed some of them in my earlier sessions in which I have tried to explain that a lot of things which are used to give this impression that this is prohibited, they have been grossly either misinterpreted, or they are, in the case of hadith, they are not even very authentic at all. So this is one thing which I just wanted to express, that when one has a sexual desire, a very strong sexual desire, either it could be extraneously induced or internally induced, then yes, gratifying it through self-pleasure is something of an option. It is not, there's nothing to feel guilty about. There's nothing to feel bad about. Of course, yes, again, it should be, thought of as a medical issue as well. If you indulge in this, you need to have proper medical advice for that as well. That's an entirely different thing. I'm not talking about that particular area. What I'm talking about is that there's no prohibition of self-gratification in religion, and the ill effects of what can happen as a result of that is something that, of course, that need to be considered separately. So in a nutshell, I can say that viewing pornography should be avoided. It is not haram per se, but it can lead to the haram thing, which is, of course, fornication. And if it does not lead to that haram, the ultimate haram, then lesser than that, there are so many things which it destroys: your family life, your interest with your spouse, your connection with God, your own expression of creativity, which of course is something which is another thing that you can use to counter that desire, or at least keep it in check. So I have tried to make some points, and I'm sure you must be having questions regarding this topic. So I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad. So far, we don't have questions, but if you could just elaborate on a couple of things. One is you allude to Sadya Zaria, but also watching adultery or fornication. That itself, I'm watching something, right? So that creates another a perspective of why not to. The second thing is that creates objectification of a woman because it's a man-created industry for desires of men. So it portrays women in a very negative role. Mm-hmm. So if you can just elaborate on this, and then we have a question by Hasib later. Thank you, sir.
So you see, of course, that is something which are those secondary, I would say, shortcomings, or they are the ones which have their own ill effect or their own evil effect, and they portray women as sexual objects. They belittle them, and I mean, this is all that we know, and is perhaps equally good for men as well, because now men are also indulging equally in such things. But I think what we need to understand in essence is that, you see, the Almighty wants us to have a pure life, to lead a pure life, to have a pure heart, to have a heart who is connected with God, to have a heart which is connected with the society, to have a heart which is occupied with the higher ideals of life. So this is a strong emotion which actually takes us away from those ideals of life. So I would suggest that the primary area, or the primary reason that from which we need to understand or abstain from as a result, is that it actually has that effect of what we call impurity in our hearts. It dents that feeling of purification. And of course, that's just a word. The word purification is just a word, but in essence, it means that it takes us away from the connection with God. It dents our family life. It takes us away from expressing our concern from the society. And I compare it to a whirlpool. Remember, it's like a whirlpool. It goes round and round, and you just get stuck in it, and it sucks you into it. And it is such a powerful effect on you if you don't keep it in check.
Thank you very much, sir. Next question is by Hasib. Hasib, please go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is about Surah Nur, where we see the directives on how men and women should clothe themselves in each other's presence. So how come on this basis we can't say that pornography is categorically haram, because doesn't it disregard those directives?
Of course, as I said, you see, those directives themselves are they themselves are of the nature of things which stop you from fornication. So you see, the Ghazze Basar directive, or the directive of which tells you that you have to properly dress. So they themselves are a class of directives, the purpose of which is to stop you from that ultimate evil thing, which is fornication or adultery. So in technical terms, they are called Sadya Zaria directives, or directives which are directives which stop you from going to that ultimate evil. And so they themselves are a category. And of course, if we are to guard our gaze, if we have to let our gaze not take undue liberty, the issue of pornography would not arise in the first place. But you see, we need to explain that these directives in themselves are actually given to stop us from that ultimate evil. So yes, I would say that in one way, if you look at it in the way as the Quran is described it, it's a very strong recommendation from the Quran that you have to guard your gaze. You just cannot let your gaze take undue liberty. But I was just explaining the word haram, the word when we say haram. So that haram is a specific term. Like, for example, eating the swine is haram, or consuming blood is haram. So in that sense, I was telling you that the haram act is actually adultery or fornication, and things which lead to it, they are also proscribed, but technically they are not called haram. The word haram is something that I was explaining. Otherwise, as far as restraining your eyes is concerned, of course, it's a directive, and it's a very high recommendation from the Quran.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up. So for these matters which are Sadya Zaria, is there still sin involved, even though we can't categorically say that they're haram?
Yes, of course. You see, it's not just the haram which entails sin. I mean, lesser than haram things, we still have the sin. I mean, there are things, for example, if you are speaking in anger with someone, to be angry at times in the right situations is correct. When you can be angry when someone is treating someone badly, but then if you express something, if you abuse that person for that, the sin is still there when you're doing something in a bad way, although the extent of the sin might reduce. So yes, if you are not obeying the Sadd Zariya directives in any way, it doesn't mean that you are not sinning, and the sin would be proportionate to that. Of course, the sin of committing something haram would be much higher, and the sin of doing something which is recommendedly not to be done would be less. But yes, it would be there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next question is from Armagan. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, I want to ask I want to have two clarification from you. You said that fornication isn't haram, but I have read Surah
I think
Surah number 7.
I never said that, my dear. I said that fornication is haram. What made you think that I said otherwise? I said what is
No, you
prohibited
say it
absolutely
leads
is
to.
no.
It leads to. Okay. So, sir, I want to ask you that Surah Raf, verse number 33, in which Allah said, "My Lord is only prohibited immortalities that are concealed and there are apparent." So, can we say that pornography fall in this category?
Of course, it does fall in that category. It's a fahisha. Fahisha, which we have been stopped from, is something which God has told me. You see, what I am explaining to you and to the gentleman just before you was the fact that there is a specific mental connotation attached to the word haram. So you see, I was explaining that. Otherwise, it doesn't mean that it's not prohibited. So it is, what I was trying to explain is that there are things which are classified as haram. The word haram has been significantly used by our fuqaha, by our jurists. So I was using I was giving some explanation regarding that. Otherwise, it is a very strong recommendation of the Quran that we should not indulge in any such things. But you see, we need to understand why is it stopping us from doing that? Why is the Quran stopping us from viewing pornography? So I was trying to explain, because that is ultimately leading to that. It could lead to that haram act. It's not that in itself is that haram act. The haram act is something which comes after it. But this does not mean that in itself it is not a sin. So of course, viewing pornography is something which is a sinful thing. It's all the same. It's the sin is there, but the ultimate sin or the real haram act because of which this has been prohibited. So what you can say is that you don't need to take it in isolation. It is actually connected with a larger sin. So I was talking about that.
Thank you very much, sir. We have 12 minutes left on this subject. Ahmed, you're next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. You've pretty much answered my question, but I just wanted to confirm: aren't these videos in themselves fahisha? Like, because fahisha, you just determine it from whatever humans determine fahisha is. Why do Al Mawrid scholars, they take fahisha to just mean zina? Why is that?
No, I don't think, I cannot speak of other scholars, but to me, the word fahisha means anything which displays one's private parts in any way. It comes under fahisha. This is the definition per se. You can pick up any dictionary or any usage dictionary. You'll find fahisha means anything related to your sexual organs, whether you expose them partially or completely. That comes in fahisha. So you see, there are categories of fahisha. There is this ultimate fahisha. For example, in Surah Nisa, which says, "Wallati yatin al-fahisha." So that fahisha actually refers to adultery. But in general, it is the usage of the word, the way it is mentioned in various verses of the Quran, in which you need to determine in which verse, what is being talked about. So, "Wallati yatin al-fahisha" is talking about adultery specifically. But for example, when when the Quran says that you have to abstain from what is fahisha, ma zahara minha wa ma batan, whether they are open or whether they are hidden, of course, it refers to anything which involves the exposure, whether partial or complete, of the sexual organs. So it depends where you are talking about. Otherwise, as I said, the context will determine. But to start off, the initial meaning of the word fahisha relates to any exposure, whether partial or complete, of your private parts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Ahmed Wattu. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is actually pornography actually led to self-pleasure. So having self-pleasure actually break the fast or not? While having fast, actually break the masturbation, actually break the fast or not? So that is actually the question.
Yes, of course it does. I mean, masturbation could be something which is allowed, and not, or at least what religion has not stopped us from. But anything which is a means of ejaculation, as is the case of self-gratification, it does break the fast.
And actually, it also falls in Janabat. In
Yes, it does. Yes,
okay.
it does.
So you cannot actually offer a prayer.
You cannot. You should not even think of doing this unless it is something which you are really pushed to. It will break your fast for sure.
Okay. Cool. That's actually a question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Armagan. Armagan, please go ahead.
Sir, it is a follow-up question. What Islam says about oral sex?
I think I've explained this when I was discussing sex education, but in a nutshell, my answer is that as far as oral and anal sex, I'll include both of them. It prohibits that, and the Quran tells us in Surah Baqarah that فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ, which means that you come to your wives the way which is the natural way. And therefore it tells us that this is the only way to satisfy our sexual urge. So indulging in oral or anal sex is something which is contrary to that. And the Quran is in fact pointing to this fact that we should not do so.
Many thanks. Next question is from Hasib. Hasib, please go ahead.
Thank you. So on the topic of Sadde Zariya actions to fornication being highly discouraged, does this also include those actions which are otherwise permissible, like, for example, divorce? But then if, for example, divorce occurs under circumstances that we normally wouldn't consider to be justifiable, could this also be considered to be sinful in certain circumstances because it also harms the family institution?
Well, we cannot say that it is classified under Sadde Zariya, but of course, if you are not having your due diligence done, anyone who's divorcing his wife, or maybe if the wife is asking for divorce, they have to be satisfied that they are doing this as a last resort, and there's no possibility for the marriage bond to continue. So if this is done in a summarily way, in a careless way, of course it would amount to not following the proper procedure, because the procedure tells us that this situation should arise, that if you need to separate from your spouse or to divorce him or her, it has to be when either one of them feels that it is virtually impossible that they can live together. Less than that, of course, it would be something which they should reconsider. But I think this is a separate class in itself, and it relates to all directives of religion. All directives of religion, whether they are negative in their connotation or they're positive, either they're stopping us from something or urging us to do something, all have their own regulations. So if you're not doing your due diligence in them, then of course you're falling short of that. So I would classify a careless divorce or a divorce which is given without due diligence to be amongst those categories.
Many thanks, sir. I will invite Mariam to put up any questions from the chat.
Yeah, so we have a couple of chat questions. The first one asks, why is it said to avoid pornography as a major sin when the participant has heard several scholars who clearly say that it's haram? Because the one, or wherever they got the source of information from, it says that whoever watches pornography has to repent in front of God, and if it's only disliked by God, then why do they need to repent?
You see, sins are of various categories, and dislikes are also of various categories. For example, the Almighty does not like partners to be associated with him, which is polytheism, and he says that I can forgive anything but polytheism. But less than that, for example, if a person lies in compulsion, or if a person is rude to his parents, that too is a sin. But you see, there are these categories of sins. So what we are trying to explain here is that why is it that pornography or things which are similar to that highly discouraged and should not be indulged in? This is because they are instrumental in breaking the institution of the family, or in actually denting that institution in a very, very bad way. So what we're trying to understand is to make sense that why should we not look at towards pornography? Why is it that the Quran stops us? So the logic behind that is that it wants to protect your family life. So, and when it wants to protect your family life, what exactly does it want to protect? It wants to protect that the spouses should not indulge in extramarital relations outside the marriage bond. And what is the most stimulant in that? So one thing that stimulates out of marriage relations is viewing pornography. So what it does is it takes you away from your spouse. It has the potential to take you away from the spouse, and it has the potential to make you a person who has little care left for the spouse, and it goes for both spouses. And who is to suffer ultimately? The child who is going to be born. So you see, the entire stress of the Quran is to protect the institution of the family. This is the ultimate thing. For that, it has prohibited adultery. For for adultery, it has prohibited to restrain your gaze. I mean, you should not let your gaze take undue liberty. You should dress up properly. See, there's a sequence of events. The ultimate thing is the protection of the family. To protect the family, you must not commit adultery. To not commit adultery, you should not indulge in pornography or let your eyes take undue liberty or dress up in a way that exposes your private parts. So you see, these are the steps that we need to understand. If we understand the steps, we'll make sense of this prohibition. Otherwise, it will be just an order. Well, don't do this. And I think that the thing that we need to come out to understand is to understand the religion of God is to always think that why are we being stopped for pornography? Why is it that we are being urged to pray, or why is it that we have to eat something and not eat some other things? So it's the logic and the sequence that if we understand in the right sequence, we would be in a better position to not only understand and gauge the extent of sin that we might be committing, and also understand that what exactly is going to be the effect of that sin on something which is much greater than that. So if I can rephrase my answer once again, I can say that the most important thing for the Almighty is the protection of the future generations, which is the future child or the children that are going to be born. For that, it is essential that the parents, the husband and the wife, are closely linked to one another, physically, emotionally, and sexually. If this doesn't happen, and they get addicted to pornography either before marriage or when they have gotten into marriage, what will happen is they'll just draw away from each other. I mean, look at, as I gave you the example of a whirlpool. There'll be two separate whirlpools going on in the same house. That child, and I say this is basically a potential thing that's going to happen. Of course, it might not always happen, but it is a potential danger to that child. And because to the Almighty, the next generation and the brought up and care of that next generation is such a big thing that all these things are given to protect the institution of the family. So remember, on the institution of the family depends the stability of the society. If the society has to be stable, if it is to be a good society, then the basic building block is the family unit. If it is not correctly established on the right lines, you'll have a society which is wayward. We'll have a society in which there are all sorts of emotions and tempers which are going on in various ways and are not being controlled. So you see, this is a larger good that the Almighty has before Him, and He wants that we understand that greater good to protect the family at all cost, and any slight thing that might dent that institution family or have an ill effect on that should be abstained and controlled.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Two more small chat questions. So a person asks, what if someone indulges in pornography after marriage? What should they do?
So again, as I said, it'll do the same thing. It'll make that person draw away from his or her spouse. If the wife is doing that, she will satisfy herself or look outside the marriage bond to satisfy her sexual desire. She will not even need the husband for that, and the husband will not need the wife for that. So if this indulgence is to be checked, then this is what has to be done, that you have to abstain from that. And if the question is that how should we abstain from that, I tried to answer that earlier on as well, and that is that you have to concentrate on the higher ideals of life. You have to connect to God in a very strong way and use that connection to find that opportunity and time to express that God-given talent in yourself and do something for humanity and mankind through the power of creativity. Because you see, your talents are talents which are able to make you express yourself in the world around you or for the world around you. So yes, even after your marriage, you need to check it. And if you want to check it, then the alternative is to look up to something which is equally powerful. And the thing which is equally powerful is the love of God. And for that love of God, of course, you have to connect with godly people and with God himself. And the time that as a result you would have is to use that to express your own creativity. So I think I have tried to give you a whole agenda in parallel, which can check your sexual urge and sexual desires. And I would repeat this, that, I mean, suppressing your sexual urge is not the objective. Suppressing would be to just totally do away with it. And this has been the case with many people in the world. If you study world religions, this celibacy, the institution of celibacy in which you don't even marry, you find that in so many religions being practiced. And this is an extreme form. It is an inhuman form, I would say. It is an unnatural thing. So the suppression of the sexual desire is not what the Almighty wants. It wants us to keep it in check, to use it at the right moments. And those right moments are, of course, with your spouse. And if there is something which you are not able to, control, and your spouse is there. I gave this example, I think, in some of my previous sessions, that at times, even when you're married, you're not able to have that sexual connection with your spouse, maybe because you're living in different cities or a different country, or you're far off from your spouse, or even at times there could be an age factor, or there could be this factor in which a person is not feeling up to it. Then if that person releases himself or herself through self-gratification or self-pleasure, this is something which is absolutely cannot be in any way proscribed. In the first place, it is not proscribed, but in such situations, it is something which is just natural to happen.
Many thanks, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. We have run beyond time on a single topic, although we gave a lot of time to the single one. So if you could please kindly go ahead to the next topic.
I know this is a difficult topic. It's something that maybe we may come back to if the need is there. But as I said, that we have to understand. In order to understand, just taking some little more time, that you see the basic change that we need to make in our lives regarding religion, the attitude that we need to change is to question why. Why is it that certain things are prohibited? Let's find out why. And believe me, if we are able to find why something is being stopped, why being stopped from some things, we will be so satiated, I would say, so satisfied, because we would think, well, yes, this makes sense, and this is something that we need to do. So if things don't make sense, then prohibitions also don't make sense. So in order to understand a prohibition, you must make sense of that prohibition. So the reason I have explained this topic, or tried to explain it, I'm sure I must have fallen short, but the reason that I have taken so much time is that you need to understand that the grand scheme of God, if you don't understand it, you'll not be able to, really have that stress or emphasis in you, or even the urge in you that, well, this is the target that I have been given in life. I have a mission in life. I have an aim in life. I am a part of God's scheme in certain ways. And if I start indulging in these things, then yes, God has given me an opportunity and a certain whole strategy how I can satisfy my sexual urge. But if I do it in an unchecked manner, this is how it will badly affect my whole life. So I would once again ask you that not only in matters of, sexual areas or sexual orientation like pornography, always, whenever you feel uncomfortable regarding a religious directive, just try to find out the why of it. And as soon as you do, you reach the why of it, you'll really feel as if, yes, there is something to it, or you'll get to understand that something is being wrongly communicated to you and that thing was not at all prohibited. Okay. Now let me go on to the third topic, and just let me see the third topic. What exactly? Yes, the third topic relates to the Dhabiha Halal issue. Okay, so let me first read out these two verses from the Quran. One of them is from Surah Anam, which is the 6th surah, and the other one is from Surah Maida, which is the 5th surah. So the 6th surah, Surah Anam, tells us, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكِرِ اسْمُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ. Eat not on which Allah's name has not been pronounced. And the second one says, وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ وَطَعَامُكُمْ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ. The food of the people of the book is lawful to you, and yours is lawful to them. So these are two very fundamental verses. Just keep their meaning in mind. The first of them says that anything on which the name of God is not pronounced is not allowed to us. And the second one says that food which belongs to the people of the book, it can be eaten. And similarly, the food which Muslims have to offer them, it is equally permissible. So these are two very fundamental verses which which are discussed whenever we discuss Dhabiha Halal. So before I explain these verses, there is a background that we need to understand, and this background is something which has been handed down by the Prophet Sunnah, and which has of course been discussed in the Quran as well. But you see, there are two things which the Quran has specified regarding what constitutes a halal or a zabiya halal, or anything which is slaughtered in the right way. So zabiya is something which is called slaughtered. It's an Arabic word which would mean an animal which is slaughtered, and halal would mean whether it is allowable or not. So zabiya halal, the expression would mean whether the slaughtered animal is halal or not. So there are two conditions which Islam has laid regarding the slaughtering of animals, and I will try to explain those conditions and also the why of it, the wisdom behind it, so that if we are able to understand that if God has not allowed certain things, then why would He do so? Why He's not our enemy? So there has to be some logic and some reason or wisdom behind it. The first thing which the Almighty wants to really emphasize is that as far as life is concerned, it holds utmost importance. So remember, I've used the word life. I have not talked about animal life or human life or plant life. No, life in itself holds tremendous sanctity to the Almighty. You just cannot tamper in any way with the life of any living being. This is the theme on which the Quran stands. The next thing it says is that life can only be taken from God's permission. And life is so sacred that you cannot touch it in any way. Yes, you can touch a life when God allows you, because life is something which has been created by God Himself. And if you have to touch that life in any way, in a way that you stop that life from going on, then God's permission must be sought. So if you want a person's life, the Almighty says there are just two ways of taking that life, and that too by authorities which we call the state authorities. One, if he has killed someone, and two, if he is guilty of spreading anarchy in the land, which the Quran calls as fasad fil ard. Other than that, human life cannot be touched. Other than that, human life cannot be touched in any way. Then the Quran says that animal life also cannot be taken because it's something which God has created. Yes, there's one condition on which that life can be taken, and that is you seek God's permission. And God says that in order to seek my permission for that, you have to say a particular statement when you slaughter that animal, and that is Bismillahi Allahu Akbar, which is a takbir, which means that in the name of God, and God is great, I slaughter this animal. So you see, in other words, life cannot be taken, human life cannot be taken in these circumstances unless I said these two conditions are satisfied, and animal life cannot be taken unless we seek God's permission. Such is the sanctity of animal life also. So basically, it is to tell us that human life and and animal life have this sanctity that without God's permission, they just cannot be in any way tampered with. And if you take an animal's life without God's permission, which would of course mean without pronouncing God's name, you would be doing something for which you are not authorized to do. You just cannot take that animal's life. The Almighty has given us permission that these animals have been created for us, but on the condition that we slaughter these animals by taking God's name, because it reminds us, it keeps on reminding us that life is extremely sacred, even if it's an animal's life. And I am authorized to slaughter this animal only because God has given me the permission that the animal that I have given you, you can consume its meat if you take my name. So we need to understand this underlying wisdom that animal life is so important that even though God has created animals for our use, which the Quran tells us, we cannot touch them, so that the sanctity of life is impressed upon us. So if we are careful in taking the life of an animal, we would be much more careful in taking the life of a human being. So you see, in the grand scheme of things, we need to understand that this is not an ordinary thing. I mean, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, slaughtering an animal without taking God's name or with taking God's name, what does it matter? Okay, we'll just pronounce Bismillah when we eat the food. It is not like that. The whole thing which is being impressed upon us is how important life is, how important animal life is. And if you have that respect for animal life, that you pronounce God's name and then take an animal's life, that will make you a person who is very caring, who is extremely careful that, okay, I'm using God's permission. And if a person who is so careful in taking an animal's life, then he would be all the more careful in taking a human being's life. So you see, the purpose is to create this huge respect for life itself, that the Almighty has told us that we can take an animal's life after we seek His permission. If you ask me personally, I would have been a vegetarian. I would have easily been a vegetarian if I had not found this permission in the Quran from the Almighty that you can eat or consume the meat of animals which are allowed to you if you take my name. Because I think me, or maybe many people amongst us, would always think that why should we kill other people for our own pleasure, or animals for our own pleasure, so to speak. But the courage that I have to kill an animal and to consume its meat is because God has told me that, yes, animal life is also sacred. But because animals have been created for you, my dear, you can consume those animals, but always seek permission from me. So you see, this is why it is so important to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar at the time of slaughter of that animal. It is not at all that, as some people think, that, well, if the name of God is taken when we start eating the food, even if it's not slaughtered by taking God's name, that would suffice. No, eating God's name is not just saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which we do at the beginning of many routines. No, this is not the case. Taking God's name is at the time of slaughter, because we are taking the life of that animal. It does not relate to saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim at the time of consumption of food. And this is where that second verse comes in, because there are a lot of people who think that, well, when we are going to non-halal restaurants and they are being served by people of the book, then it's fine, because we are taking food from the people of the book, and the Quran tells us that you can eat the book or the food taken by the people from the people of the book. No, this is not the case. The Quran actually has this context in this verse, that there were many things which the people of the book had forbidden on themselves in the times of the Prophet, because of their own taste. At the times they would not eat the camel, because they thought that their own forefather Jacob did not like the camel. We know that the Quran had prohibited a lot of allowed things to them because of their own rebelliousness. So that they needed to be set right, and the last messenger came to set them right. And once they were set right, this verse was revealed, which said, Al-yawma uhilla lakum at-tayyibat. Today, all these lawful things are now once again allowed to you, because now, once again, the things have been set right. Things which needed to be prohibited have been taken out. The things that they have prohibited themselves have once again been allowed, and the things which were prohibited because of their rebelliousness have also been allowed. So this is the context of the verse. Otherwise, taking the name of the animal has to be done at the time of the slaughter. It cannot be other than that. So this is the first condition of Dhabiha. This is the first condition. Now there's a second condition also which the Quran tells us, and that is that when you slaughter an animal, you have to do it in a way that all the blood actually leaves the body. And this can only be done if you slaughter an animal in a way in which the slaughter is done at a particular place of the animal's body, so that the blood gushes out and it does not stay in the body. And the reason for this, again, we can gauge from the Quran, is that eating the blood of the animal is again a sign of savagery, and whatever we eat is something, it has an effect on our lives. The diet that we eat has an effect on our lives. So the Almighty has impressed upon us that whatever you eat is going to affect your routines and your lives. So savagery or carnivorous animals, they are prohibited. We don't eat the lion simply because we know, for one, of course, we cannot tame it, but if we are able to slaughter it, even in the way that we take God's name, the meat that we're going to eat of a carnivorous animal is going to ultimately affect our own temperament and make us more aggressive like the lion is. So we have been prohibited to eat the meat of animals which are carnivorous. For example, as I said, the lion, or in the case of seafood, something very similar like the shark, for example. So because of the fact that these are animals who have an effect on our own lives in the long term. So it is essential that when you slaughter an animal, it should not be stunned in a way that the blood sticks or remain in the body, and you just wait for the animal to just completely die away, and then you make the meat of that animal. So these are the two conditions which are absolutely essential for Dhabiha to be halal. One of them is you have to take the name of God when you're slaughtering the animal, because we are not authorized otherwise to take life. Such is the sanctity of animal life, number one. And number two, the blood which is to be dispensed from the body of an animal is essential, because if it remains in the body, there's a chance, there's a very high chance that you will consume that blood while you're cooking that animal, although it not be, you still wash that blood, but it will still stick with the meat. And that is going to ultimately affect our temperament, or it has the potential of affecting our temperament. So these are the two reasons for which we need to be extra cautious in our diet, in which we have to be very careful regarding animals which have been done in this way. Now, of course, there's this question that at times the slaughtering is taking place through machines. In many abattoirs, in many slaughterhouses, it's not always the person who is slaughtering is there. It's basically done through machines. So if the machines are able to slaughter that animal in a way that the blood completely oozes out, or a better part of it comes out of the body, and if it is not possible for a human being to be present there, even if a machine is there which pronounces Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, so in a bulk sort of a thing, when you're doing this whole act in a bulk, in a way which is commercial, then I would think that yes, that commandment would be fulfilled. But my explanation here was basically related to the why of it. So I have tried to explain why do we need to slaughter the animal by taking God's name, and I've tried to explain that why is it essential that the blood of the animal must be totally taken out. So I've tried to explain the why of it, and as I said, if you understand the why of it, we will be able to understand why God has given us a directive like this. So I come to an end to this particular segment, and if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer.
Thank you very much, sir. We have 12 minutes for question and answer. Armagan, please go ahead.
Sir, why plant's life isn't that sacred as animal life? It is life.
So you see, there are life forms. It does seem that the Almighty has given special sanctity to human life and to animal life, although plants are alive in a certain way. But it does seem that because of the fact that the Almighty has, they are organic living beings, but the way the extent of life, I would say, or the level of life that they have is much less than that of an animal or that of a human being. So I think this is a concession which God has given us. So what we can do is basically understand that why is it that God has not stopped us from eating vegetables. So because of the fact that the nature of an animal, because the nature of an animal life, of course, far different from plant life, I think that this is something which is allowed to us as a concession.
Sir, if a non-Muslim sacrifice an animal by taking Allah's name, it is halal or it is halal?
So if a non-Muslim is a polytheist, if he intentionally does shirk, then that would not be allowed, because the Almighty has said that it has to be slaughtered by a monotheist, and that could be, I mean, a Christian or a Jew, but a person who ascribes partners intentionally to God, like for example a Hindu or people of their similar to their faith, then that is something that would not be allowed. So you see, if you can sum up, you can say that the person who has slaughtered an animal has to be primarily a monotheist. Number two, he has to take the name of God at the time of slaughter. And number three, the slaughter has to be done in a way that all the blood oozes out. So these are the three essential conditions for a zabiha to be halal.
Many thanks. Next question is from Mariam. Mariam, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So my work requires killing a lot of mice so I could extract their brains, and I was wondering if I also need to follow the same rules of the Dhabiha. I know it's not like eating them, but since we have to honor life,
no, that's an entirely different thing. You see, when you are doing experiments, maybe making medicines or antidotes or other things which can give you some scientific advancement in a particular field, that's an entirely different category. So if you're killing mice, you see, these particular stipulations are made for the consumption of meat from another animal. So for the purpose of experimentation or for any other purpose, like you just kill an animal if it's something which is offensive in any way, that's an entirely different category. So all these conditions are imposed for your diet, for your consumption. They don't relate to other spheres.
Thank you very much. We have 8 minutes left and perhaps minimum questions to go ahead. Haseeb, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my question is about Surah Al-An'am, verse 145, where it says that nothing is forbidden except for dead animal or blood spilled out or flesh of swine, for indeed it is impure. So what does that entail, the it is impure part, and is it referring to all three of those things? Yeah.
No, it refers to all of them. The word used is fisq. Innahu fisq, which means it has some element of disobedience to God. It has something which has a negative connotation. So all those four things are actually implied, because in some way or the other this is there. For example, you're sacrificing an animal without taking God's name. There is this filth or fisq of aqidah, which as a result is incorporated, because you're not authorized to take any life without taking God's name. Similarly, when you're spilling, you're consuming blood, again, that is something which is causing that savagery or the element of becoming like a carnivorous animal or affecting your temperament in that way. So each and every one of them has some shade which links to that fisq.
Thank you very much. The next question is by Asir. Asir, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. So my question is with regard to the animal products, pig products especially, which are used in medicines. There are several medicines which are porcine derived, sir, from the fat of the pig. So can that be used?
I think there is a principle, if that you can understand that principle and apply it, this will become very easy for you in all these cases. For example, in gelatin, in products which are of this sort, and that is if the chemical composition of that product changes. If the chemical composition of that product changes from its original and becomes a new product, then there is absolutely nothing to be worried about. It's only in its original form that it is prohibited. In my studies, I have seen that in most cases, the original thing totally changes its composition and it becomes a new thing. It undergoes a chemical change. So if that thing undergoes a chemical change and you're reasonably sure about it, then you can consume it. There could be instances, I cannot rule them out, that the chemical change would not take place, but this is hardly the case, because in most cases you process them, and whenever you process something in its original form, it changes its chemical composition. I mean, it becomes a new thing, so to speak. So if that is the case, then there's nothing to worry about.
Sir, one more question, sir. What about hunting of animals for game? Animals which are allowed, hunting of animals, sir, as a sport, sir, as a game. Right. Yeah.
Well, hunting for your own need is something which, of course, the Quran has specifically allowed, but hunting as a game in which you hunt animals, I would say that this is against the temperament. I mean, there's no express prohibition mentioned anywhere in the Quran. But personally, I would think that this is something that should be abstained from, because you are doing it for your own sport and your own pleasure. It's not for the meat of the animal, which is primarily allowed because you need the meat. But if it is purely done for the sake of sport, I think the temperament of religion is such that it would discourage such a sport.
Many thanks. We have 4 minutes left and 2 questions. Abdul Rahman, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, what is the concept of nazar in Islam, especially in the background of slaughtering an animal?
Well, you have to dedicate that animal to God. So when you take God's name, in fact, that takes care of that as well. So nazar, or making a vow, or dedicating an animal to someone was the case in the times of the Prophet and in the Jahiliyyah period, because they would dedicate an animal when they would slaughter it by pronouncing that, well, this is for such and such a deity and this is for such and such an idol. So in order to stop polytheism or shirk in all its respects, the Almighty told us that if you have to slaughter an animal, you cannot dedicate it to anyone except to God Himself. So that is already taken care of if we pronounce that takbir of Bismillah Allahu Akbar and have that intention that we are not dedicating it to some human person or some saint or some revered personality, but to God only. So that is a thing that we need to understand, that we just cannot dedicate that slaughter to anyone except God.
Many thanks. Next question is by Ahmed Battu. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Sir, as in Surat Maida, Allah said you can also eat and share food with Ahl Kitab. So right now, Jews only eat kosher food, as far I understand. So right now, Muslim can eat that food if it's or not, because yes. I don't know the background of that kosher food.
Kosher is absolutely fine, because kosher it is processed exactly the way the Quran has prescribed us. It is when the animal is slaughtered, the name of God is taken, and when the animal is slaughtered, it is done by a monotheist. Jews are monotheists. And when such an animal is slaughtered, it is done so in a way that all the blood is drained away. So all the 3 conditions of a halal slaughter are met by kosher. So yes, you can consume kosher.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Many thanks. Next question is by Asir. Asir, please go ahead.
Sir, my question, sir, 2 questions again. So one is with regard to Dhabiha meat, sir, the slaughtering has to be done through the neck only, you said, because that's the most appropriate method. But if a cut is made to an animal by pronouncing Allah's name to any other part of the body and the blood is drained, that will also be allowed?
Yes. You see, it all depends what the vein or where the place is which actually is instrumental in making the blood gush away and gush out of the body. If there is some other place also in the animal's body from which it can be ensured that all the blood is drained away, that is fine. So the purpose is to drain away the blood. It's not necessary to cut it by the jugular vein, but because scientifically we know that a jugular vein is the vein, once which is severed, the blood gushes out because of the fact that perhaps is the vein or the artery which connects it to the heart pump, and the heart pumps out the blood in a way, so to speak. So anywhere in the body. So we know that, for example, in the case of camels, they were hamstrung. Hamstrung is that they are made a cut near below their abdomen, near the feet, near the legs. So you see, it all depends what the animal is, and if we are sure that that particular cut is going to drain out all the blood, it is fine. It's not necessary to always cut it from the neck. We just need to know that which are the animals for which we can have some other parts of the body which, if they are severed, the blood will gush out.
Sir, my second question is relating to the not to this topic but the previous topic. So this is regarding divorce. If there is a married couple, Muslim couple, they have got children, and somehow because of some problems, they don't want to stay married. But because of societal pressure and because of the family pressure, they have to stay together because of the young children. So what is Islam's take on that? If they want to stay in the same house, but not as a married couple, not as a husband-wife, but just as two normal adult friends.
Well, as long as the divorce has not taken place, if they're just living as 2 separated people, it is fine. I mean, they're still in the marriage bond, but virtually they are separated from one another. They don't have any relationship with one another. It's fine if they live with one another. I mean, I mean, they're still husband and wife technically, but in reality, they are living as separate people in the same house.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We will go ahead to the next topic.
Okay. So now we come to the fourth and last topic of today, and which would also perhaps signal the end of this series, if I remember as far as I can, that we've finished most of the topics, if not all. So this is the question of the rule of law, and I was referring this to you earlier on because, of course, there is this notion that at times we do find that there is this scenario in which we do seem that the law of the land may clash with the law of the Sharia. So before I even enter into that, let me just point this verse to you, which tells us that how important it is to obey the law of the land, or the law which is instituted by the rulers of a country. It says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu atiyu Allah wa atiyu Rasul wa ulil amri minkum. Actually, the word minkum has been unfortunately left out here. It says, believers, obey God and obey the messenger and those in authority among you. So those in authority among you, of course, this refers to a Muslim ruler. We have the Prophet being talked about, we have the Almighty being talked about, and we've been talked about the Muslim rulers. And this actually is that directive of the Quran, that the rulers, whatever they enact in the parliament as laws, they have to be obeyed. So in a nutshell, obeying the law of the land is something which is like obeying the Sharia itself, because the Sharia tells us to obey the law of the land. So at the moment, I'm talking about a Muslim country in which there are, of course, Muslim rulers, or a city, or a nation state in which there are Muslim rulers, and you are bound to follow certain laws. I'll come to the case in which there is if you're living in a non-Muslim country and what you need to do. Let's talk about that in a while. But firstly, the thing that that the Quran impresses upon us is that in all cases we must follow the law. We cannot violate the law in any way. And when we say we have to follow the law, this would mean that follow the law in letter and in spirit. And this would include all kinds of laws. It could include traffic laws, it would include tax laws, it would include laws which are made for the community. So when we are actually following the law, when you're stopping at a red light, when you're not texting while driving, if that is the law in your country or city, then you're actually honoring the Quran. So you see, the first thing that we have been told is that as citizens of a country, it is essential that we follow the law that has been made. Well, this does not mean that we would always agree with the law. We might disagree with a certain law which might be a bad law, or a law which is not fair, but for that we have a separate outlet. I mean, there's a separate course that we can adopt, and that is we can try to change that law through a proper democratic process, which is in place in most countries, and of course that can be adopted. But unless that is done, even if you find yourself disagreeing with a certain law, then that is not reason enough to stop yourself from not obeying it. You have to obey the law come what may. And as I said, such is the sanctity of the law of the land, that the Sharia has actually asked us that you must obey the law of the land. So when it says Atiyullah wa Atiyu Rasul wa ulil amri minkum, obey your rulers, it's actually referring to the laws that they have implemented as a result of being elected. And if those laws are implemented through a legislation done by the parliament, which would mean the legislation done by the majority, then they become binding on each and every one of us. And this is important because if we live in many third world countries, we do find a total apathy towards obeying the law. So we have laws of the land in which they are the rich and the poor who are differentiated upon, they are discriminated. We have laws in which you can actually buy justice if you are violating the law. So in all such cases, you see, you need to, first of all, we need to bring ourselves in the right perspective. If we are disobeying the law, we are not only disobeying our commitment to our country as citizens, we are in fact disobeying the Quran. So such is the importance of obeying the law, that the disobeying of law in any way is tantamount to disobeying God himself, because it is God who has told us that we have to live When we live in a country, then we have to honor our word, our commitment to that country, which of course is done by following the rules and regulations. So what actually it brings to light is that our religion tells us that we are not living in a jungle. There's no such thing as a law of the jungle. We are living as an organized people in a city and following certain regulations. So therefore, if we bribe someone, if we disobey the law, if we hoodwink the law, if we bypass the law, remember, we are not just violating our commitment with the country that we live in, but also we are going contrary to the Quran. And I often talk about this when we're speaking to our youngsters and our younger generation, that remember how important it is to realize that the sanctity which the law of your land possesses, that your own religion has given it that importance that you must follow it. Now, of course, comes this burning question that when you're living in a country which is a non-Muslim country, and you are allowed or you are forced to do something which is against that against your own beliefs, then what do you need to do? So let me try to explain this through certain examples. And you see, when we're living, for example, in the US or in the North American continent, or you're living maybe in Australia or in the UK as well. So there are many countries, many such Western countries, so to speak, or the first world countries, in which, for example, polygamy is prohibited. You cannot marry more than one spouse. But what Muslims do is that in such countries in which polygamy is prohibited, what they do is that they enter into a marriage contract at the state level with one spouse, and they would register that marriage, but they would marry maybe a second wife or even a third or a fourth one, and not register that wife in that country. And they say that, well, they have been allowed by the Sharia, and so therefore if they are taking another wife, they are perfectly allowed to do so, because if they're living in a country where they cannot practice what their religion tells them, then this is something that they can do. Now, this is based on a huge misconception. Religion may allow polygamy, and of course I've discussed that in some of my previous sessions, but it never makes it obligatory or mandatory. So if you would like to marry more than one, you have the option, but this is not licensed to hoodwink the law. This is not licensed to bypass the law in any way. You just cannot do so. If you're living, for example, in the United States or in the United Kingdom or in Australia, where polygamy is proscribed, is prohibited, then you have to follow it in letter and spirit, because this is not an example of violation or not following your own Sharia. An example would have been that, for example, if the Sharia had made it obligatory upon every Muslim, mandatory upon every Muslim to have 4 wives, and then there would be a situation in which he would be stopped from marrying those 4 wives. This is never the case. This is not the case. So this would be an absolutely wrong application of this notion that because the Sharia has allowed us to take 4 wives, and we are living in a country where we cannot take 4 wives, therefore, if we marry them through a contract which is done by a mufti or someone outside the court, then that would be fine. No, we would be guilty of transgressing the law. We would be guilty of violating that law. Another example is the issue of cousin marriages. So because of medical reasons, there are so many countries, including the United States, in which in many states, if not all, you just cannot have cousin marriages. You cannot marry your cousins. But because Muslims think that they have been allowed to marry their cousins, I have seen even in my own family, there are instances in which marriage has taken place between cousins, and the plea which is given is that, well, because Islam allows us, therefore we can do that. Remember, again, this is a matter of allowance. It has allowed us, but it has not made mandatory upon us to marry a cousin. So therefore, once again, this is an issue that we need to realize that this cannot be done. If you're living in a non-Muslim country, you are living under a contract of citizenship, and that contract entails that you have to follow the law. If you don't feel like following the law, then the best way is to just migrate from that country. Don't enter that country in the first place. But this cannot be the case, that you violate the law and you justify doing something by saying, well, this is what our Sharia says. Remember, what the Sharia says in both these examples is just an option. It's not an obligation. Had it stopped us from, to give you a very blatant example, had a certain law of a non-Muslim country stopped Muslims from praying even in their homes, which of course is also an almost an impossibility, that could be an example of an instance in which we are stopped by something, by a state, and that particular directive is something that we have to do as an obligation from our religion. So that could be an example, but I don't think that anywhere in the world you can even find such an example. So another example that will perhaps illustrate my point a little more is the hijab prohibition in France that we have been seeing in the last 10 years. So we have now a complete prohibition in France. We did find in the last 5 or 7 years there were dissenting voices, and there were people who had at times allowed it, and there was a legislation against it, and there's this back and forth procedure going on. But so here, if Muslim women think that taking the hijab or head covering is something which their religion tells them to do, so first they need to understand that in all such matters, they first need to find out what exactly religion tells them to do. So if they think that religion is compulsorily telling them that they must cover their heads, then they have two options. Either they migrate from their area because they think that they cannot follow their religion, or they come into contact, in meaningful contact with the authorities and tell them, well, then this is what our religion tells us, and we just cannot do away with our head coverings. So two things will result. Either they will listen to you, which is not being the case which has not been the case there, or they will impose the ban. And in that case, you need to make a decision, because at times under compulsion, if you do certain things, it is your choice that you do them or not. But if you do something under compulsion, that the Almighty actually gives you that leverage, that concession. And then we have a third option as well, that if you violate the law by still wearing the head covering, then of course you'll be persecuted and put into jail or whatever, or be fined. So in all such instances, you don't have the option to disobey the law. You have the option of either migrating from that country or paying the penalty of violating that law and be penalized or put into jail, or, as I said, negotiating with people that this is your religious right and you cannot deprive them. And if they don't listen to you, then of course this would be injustice on their part. It would be persecution on their part. But even if they are persecuting Muslims for this reason, this is not reason enough to even violate the law. So such is the strict nature of our religion, that it wants us to honor the law at all costs. Either be persecuted and then bear the penalty, or you migrate from that place, or the third option is to do away with that head covering and think that God will forgive you for that for this act, because you were forced to do that. So these are the options. But to actually challenge the law in any way is not an option in any circumstances. So this is something that we need to realize, that whenever we are living in a country, we are bound by the law. Remember, this is a promise that we have given. This is a word that we have given. We just cannot do away with that word. We just cannot say that we are going to bypass that word, whether it is done in a way which is covert, whether which is done in a way which is overt, and in a way that every one of us knows what's going on, whether it is hidden, whether it's open. In all respects, as I said, following the law in letter and spirit. This is what has to be done. And if you don't find the law congenial to you, either you discuss it, or if you think that this is something which is not happening according to your own desire or will, then you just leave that place. But breaking the law is not an option at all. So such is I would say, a very, very hard stance that religion tells us. So I would now like any questions that you might have on this topic. This is the time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad. So people can raise their hands for any questions on this topic. And if you don't have questions on this topic, then we could take general topics general questions from the previous topics of today. Though we do have one chat question. Mariam, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the question asks, what if a husband doesn't talk to his wife for more than 2 to 3 months, and they're far away from one another, and there's a fight going on between them? What should
be done?
Yeah.
I mean, we should. I mean, the fight has to be analyzed. Why is the fight taking place? What exactly is the reason? If there can be a reconciliation. So I think it's all common sense and practice that we come about. If there is a specific religious question, I can answer that. Otherwise, if there is a quarrel going on, uh, uh, I mean, we need to make sense of all these things and be careful that it is going to not be in any way fruitful to indulge any such debate or altercation. So that has to be avoided. But I can be of help if you have a religious tinge to that question. Otherwise, I think we should all use our common sense to avoid that quarrel as much as possible.
So the participant said that it's related to this topic. I'm asking them if they have a clarification. I'll come back.
Okay.
As soon as
Thank you. The next question is from Asir. Asir, please go ahead.
Sir, with regard to the persecution, sir, in a democratic country, if the constitution of that country guarantees minorities or religious minorities freedoms, they can practice and propagate their religion.
Right.
But what happens is, because of the change of the government, now there is a push for a uniform civil code, that there won't be any personal law, religious minority. There will be just one uniform law applied to all the citizens, irrespective of their religion. So would that fall under religious persecution?
Well, yes, I would still say, because you see, what happens is that if there is something which specifically relates to religion, and we think that our religion tells us, and that particular directive, when we follow it, it's not infringing on the rights of other people. For example, if I, as a Muslim lady, if I cover my head, this is my personal choice. I mean, how am I affecting in any way, or influencing in any way, or not following in any way the likes or dislikes of someone who is outside me? I mean, I am responsible for my own actions. So therefore, if my religion is telling me to do something, and doing that something is not affecting anyone outside of me, this is still persecution. So in order to have a cogent directive, you need to have some basis. I mean, when I say that this is something, for example, if I say that wearing glasses is something that my religion has told me, and if I wear those glasses, and wearing those glasses is not going to affect my society in any way, or a third individual in any way, why should anyone stop me from doing that? So anything which I regard to be part of religion, and that particular thing, when I follow it, is not going to affect anyone else or negatively impact anyone else, why should that not be allowed?
Sir, anything which is allowed in the religion, as I understand it, which has not been made mandatory by the religion, but is allowed, or
Yes.
or also sometimes encouraged. If I want to follow it in letter and spirit completely, just
Right.
because of my love for the religion, but the law of the land is such that it is not allowing me, so that falls under persecution. That will fall under persecution.
Right.
But
You see, I understand. So you see, when women, I was talking about this whole issue in the context of hijab. So if women think that hijab is compulsory for them, head covering is compulsory for them, so the question was, or the answer was given in that background. So when women, they would not like to dispense their head coverings because they think that it's something which is mandatory for them, then I would call this persecution. But if they are following something which is not mandatory and which is optional, I gave this example of polygamy and cousin marriages, that would certainly not come under persecution.
Many thanks, sir.
Sir, last point. If under the present circumstances, even migration is not possible simply because of the laws. So how should one handle that situation?
I think then in that case you'll have a legitimate plea before God that if you don't follow something and you're also not able to migrate from that place, now you are pushed. I mean, you don't have anything to do. So if you do something which is done in under compulsion, I think that hopefully God will forgive us for that.
Thank you, sir.
Many thanks. Next question is from Armagan. Please go ahead.
Sir, I want an advice from you. As far as Kashmir is concerned, there are many group of people. Some favor India, some favor Pakistan. So, what Islam say about in this situation?
Well, basically, this is a political question, and I think what the political guideline for this is that the right of self-determination must be given importance. So there should not be any external pressure or an external opinion. The people who constitute Kashmir themselves are the people of Kashmir. I think they have the right for self-determination to decide their own fate, and let them decide what they would like to do. Whether they would like independence or they would like some affiliation to any of the two countries. I think it should be the will of the people of Kashmir that should be implemented, and that will, of course, would be uh, elicited through a general election, maybe, or something which tells us that what exactly the majority would like to do. So I think the will of the majority of the people of that land, that is what we call self-determination. So that must be honored.
Okay, matlab, we can say will versus law. We should favor will.
No, the law itself here is will. The law of self-determination is that you are given this right to choose yourself whether you would like to become a free country or you would like to become part of some other country. So this is something which this is like a human rights issue, that I should decide my own fate, and when I am living as a collectivity, then my collectivity should decide. No one from outside my collectivity. Why should someone outside impose his or her will or their collective will on things that is related to my own self? So people like I'm living in a house and we are 5 people. So my neighbors have no right to decide the way I would like to live or where I'd like to live. It is the people living in the house who should be given this right.
Many thanks, sir. Next question is from Abdul Rahman. Abdul, please go ahead.
Sir, at the end of the session, can I ask the question from off the topic?
Yes, if we don't have any questions regarding the topic, then sure.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, many of the Muslim apologists try to say that the 9/11 issue was pre-planted against Muslims. So, what's your point of view in the 9/11 and the perspective of the Al Qaeda, and what's the blame on Muslims?
I think that I cannot give an opinion because this is basically a political issue. I'm not qualified for that, but a general view would be yes, that this is what they did. They claim to have done. They announced it 5 or 6 years before that US is their enemy number one. Osama bin Laden in 1994 and 95 in that famous gathering at Khost in Afghanistan, he had actually recited the Quran and said that, well, I'm declaring war against the United States. So he actually thought that the Quran has told him to wage war against the people of disbelief, which he actually said that Aymatul Kufr, which Surah Tawbah says they actually refer to in these times to the United States. So this is what he believed and this is what he did. And of course, I don't agree with him at all that this is something that he should have done. And that's what I can say in principle. Whether he did it or not, whether it was a Jewish conspiracy or some other conspiracy, or that is something I think which people should determine for themselves. All that I can say is that if he did it and if he's behind it, which is quite likely, then he didn't do a service at all to religion. In fact, he did a great disservice, and this is something he might have considered to be correct. But according to my understanding, I think this is something that was absolutely wrong to have been done.
So what's about the Samson cartoon and in different movies of 1990s in which 9/11, the clock, and in cartoons it's depicted that it may have to occur in future?
I don't know about them. You see, as I said, this is something which does not fall in my area of expertise. I can give you an answer on the basis of the Quran, maybe, or some religious background that you might have. If these are the happenings or these are something which were depicted in cartoons 6 or 7 years ago, I cannot comment on that. I mean, people should determine or make an assessment for their own selves. I can only give you an answer in principle that if this was done with religious intent by religious people, then they have grossly misunderstood religion. That's what I can say. Other than that, what has happened is something that all of you need to do research and make up your own minds.
Many thanks. Next question is from Mariam. Mariam, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I wanted to touch bases on all of the different kind of questions regarding pornography. There is another argument where people say that couples, after some time they start getting bored of each other, and so they watch porn together to make their sex life more spicy or exciting. What do you say about that?
I think that this could be something which might spice them up earlier on, but ultimately it becomes an addiction. And once something becomes an addiction, I gave that example of a whirlpool again and again. It's like a whirlpool. You enter that whirlpool in your married life once again, and the intention is very noble, so to speak, that you're spicing up your sex life. But what does it actually do? It might spice it up for an initial period, but ultimately it pulls you into itself. It sucks you in itself so much that as a marital counselor, I have seen husbands and wives drawing away from each other, starting off with this pretext, well, that they're just going to spice up their sex life by viewing pornography. It starts off with that, but ultimately the end is very, it's not at all something that they actually wished for, because what they would like to have, achieve would be that couple harmony. And it hardly does so, because as I said, it makes you a person who looks out of your marriage bond, and it satisfies your sexual urge even before you meet your wife, and the wife meets her husband. And ultimately they become isolated, and there are so many other things which arise. So I think that it's a good it feels like a very right basis, or something which was very, it could be something which would be allowed, but I think that it does prove counterproductive.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. A general question: seafood versus halal and haram. What kind of seafood is haram?
So exactly on the same principle that all animals which catch their prey by tearing them apart and which eat their meat, as I said, like lions and vultures and all sorts of these animals of land. If you just by analogy see that any fish or sea animal which is carnivorous and catches its prey through its sharp claws, sharp teeth, then by equal analogy, that would also be regarded as prohibited. So as I said, sharks is a very prominent example. So they are carnivorous. They tear apart their prey by actually using their sharp teeth. So anything which is similar to that carnivorous animal on land, which tears apart its prey and feeds on it, on the meat of that animal, would be equally regarded as prohibited if it is found in the sea.
Thank you, sir. One more thing: octopus, they don't have teeth. They are carnivorous, and they usually don't tear apart their prey.
So I think this could be an area in which people could have a different view, and both views could be entertained. If someone reaches this conclusion that although it is carnivorous, but it doesn't tear apart its prey, and it's an exception, then, well, someone can have that opinion. But I can only tell you the principle. You see, the application is something which people need to do themselves. The application is that you tear apart a prey, and the purpose is to tear the meat of that prey and consume that. So wherever you find this in its complete form, you should abstain from it, and maybe in some cases you might form it in a lesser form. So as a precautionary measure, one person could have the opinion, well, even as a precaution, we should not eat it because it has that gray area, and another person could say, well, this is something which is not of a gray area. So I think we can accommodate both opinions if they know what the principle is.
Thank you very much, sir. We have time for only one more question. Saima, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you. मेरा question है, मैंने अभी join किया. I don't know, somebody has already asked that kind of question. मेरा question है हलाल से related कि हमें जो है हलाल के साथ पाक और तैयब चीजों खाने का भी हुक्म है, मगर हमारा सारा focus जो है वो हलाल के ऊपर है और पाक और तैयब की तरफ हम ध्यान नहीं देते. तो पहले मेरा सवाल है कि क्या डिफरेंस है हलाल, पाक और तैयब में, और दूसरा ये कि हम बाहर मुल्कों में रहते हैं तो हमें फूड ऑर्गेनिक तो मिल जाता है, गोश्त ऑर्गेनिक मिल जाता है, पर वो हलाल नहीं होता. तो कौन सी शर्ट्स जो है वो इम्पोर्टेंट है, पाक और तैयब होना या हलाल होना ज्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है या दोनों होना?
और आपने चूंकि लेट ज्वाइन किया, मैंने इन सवालों का जवाब जब हम टॉपिक कवर कर रहे थे मैं दे दिया है। सिर्फ एक करेक्शन मैं कर देता हूँ, बाकी फिर आप जरा पुराना वाला सुन लीजिएगा। तैयब का यहाँ मतलब जो पाकीज़गी है ना, ये है तैयब लित्ताम, मतलब जो खाने के लिए मौजू है, यूं आप समझ लीजिए। और अल्लाह ताला ने चरिंदों को मौजू किया है, दरिंदों को मौजू नहीं किया। तो यहाँ असल में मुराद है चरिंदे। चरिंदे का मतलब है जो घास चरते हैं, जो चरते हैं, जो ग्रेज करते हैं, ग्रेजिंग एनिमल्स। तो तैयब से यहाँ मुराद जो पाकीज़गी है, ये वो पाकीज़गी नहीं है जिसको आप प्योरिटी कहते हैं। ये अरबी जुबान का एक मुहावरा और उसलूब है जिसको हम कहते हैं तैयब लित्ताम, यानी ताम या खाने के लिए तैयब, खाने के लिए मौजू, खाने के लिए होलसम। तो वो कौन से हैं? वो हैं कि जो नॉन कार्निवरस हैं, जो हर्बिवरस हैं, जो चरिंदे हैं। ये तो मैं आपको मैं ऐड कर सकता हूँ। जो बाकी जो मैंने तफसील है जो बताई है कि वो क्या क्या जरूरी है, वो मैं आपसे कहूंगा कि आप काइंडली, वो काफी लंबा हिस्सा था, उसको आप सुन लीजिए। लेकिन जो तैयब का वर्ड है वो मैंने आपके लिए एक्सप्लेन कर दिया। यहाँ तैयब उस मारूफ मफहूम में नहीं है।
Many thanks, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. I think we have run beyond time. So if you have any ending statements for this lecture series, please go ahead. Thank you so much for this.
I think that we tried our best to cover a lot of topics. I do think there might have been some still left, but time does not allow me to go beyond these 7 lecture series. We have, I think, have 7 or maybe 6 or 7. Yes. So I think that if there is anything has been left, maybe we can, inshallah, cover it through a question answers. We will continue this session in a different format at the same time. This is the Islam Study Circle's time, which we will resume, inshallah, from next week. And that will go on. You can ask any remaining questions in that session. But this series was actually planned for the purpose that all those important questions should be discussed. And if I have been able to just tickle your minds and made you more mindful of the fact that you don't need to be convinced for the answers that I've given you, you just need to try out your own, to seek out your own journey in this regard, to find out the truth for yourselves. But the purpose is that don't lull your questions to sleep. Don't hush them under the carpet. Try to find answers to these questions. And if you have any questions and discussions, inshallah, we'll be available at other forums as well. But always be a seeker of the truth. Become a true seeker of the truth. Find out what the truth is. This is our real test in life, that we don't just shy away from questions. We should try to find answers to these questions. And even if we end up with the wrong answer, I think the Almighty, if we sincerely find the truth, and we sincerely are up to this task, even if we end up at the wrong conclusion, I do hope, inshallah, that God will forgive us for this, because we tried our best. And so, inshallah, hopefully this series would have done as much as to tickle your minds. And if it has done that little bit, I would consider my job to be done. So, it is Khuda Hafiz from me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. Stay blessed and stay happy always. And thank you very much for everyone. To everyone, all my friends, my colleagues, this was a very good run. Thank you.
Thank you very much.